Hey y'all, let's go on a journey back 100 years to our great-grandma's kitchen. This is Return to Home with Michele Broxton. Today we're gonna make cast iron skillet biscuits, my great-grandma's Sunday Dutch oven pot roast, and my Aunt Imogene's caramel apple pie. You're gonna love it. Let's get cooking. For cast iron skillet biscuits, you need just a few things to make it perfect. First, we're going to start with 2 cups of bread flour. Using bread flour is very important in this recipe because it helps it raise tall and fluffy. Next, 5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. I'm going to mix all this together with just a handy dandy fork out of your drawer. This recipe was first published in 1918 by Fanny Farmer. Next, we're going to use a whole stick of cubed butter. It's important in biscuits and in pie crust that the butter be cold because when it gets in the oven, the heat from the oven creates steam and it makes the butter pop. And who doesn't love a flaky pie crust? Or flaky biscuits? I know I sure do. Put the butter in our flour mixture, and we're just going to use our fork to combine everything evenly into small pieces. Some people use their hands for this part. Some people use a pastry cutter. I just use a fork. My mom uses a big fork. If your arm gets tired, just switch hands. It'll all taste just fine. Now, you can also use a food processor for this. I don't know why I've never done that. I just always do it in a bowl. So you can see now how this is starting to form little tiny pieces that are covered by flour. They don't all have to be the same size, but what we don't want is we don't want a big hunk of flour with no butter in it. We want the butter to be pretty evenly distributed throughout the flour. As your butter gets warmer, it's going to be a little easier to work with. We're really coming along now. As you work along and you get toward the end like this, if you see big pieces of butter, just push the tongs of your fork right on top of it, and you've immediately solved the problem. It'll coat with flour and your butter isn't going to come back together because it's coated with flour. So I just work my way all around the edge of the bowl. And at this point, I'm really just checking to make sure I haven't missed any pieces. Okay, next we're going to add a cup to 1.25 cups of milk. Now, I would say start with a cup because you can always add more milk, but it's very hard to take it out. So let's add a cup of milk. And we're just going to mix it in. I like to start from the outside and work my way in. See how that's starting to form a nice ball? Different people have different rules of thumb when they're making dough. I like to have a pretty moist dough, so I'm going to add a little more milk to this. The reason why I like a wetter dough is because I want to add my flour when it's on the counter. I want to have control of my dough. And I want the inside to be moist and the outside to be crunchy. That's really looking good. Now, you don't want to handle your dough too much. Biscuit dough and pie dough is different from yeast dough because it will get tough the more you handle it. Okay, that's pulled away from the edge of our bowl really nicely. We're going to now put it on a floured surface and make our biscuits. Just grab a little flour, flour your surface, and for this you can use a roller if you'd like, but you don't have to. You just take your dough ball, put it right onto your flour, And again, see how that's still tacky? I like it like that. You may not, and that's okay, but I do. Now at this point, I add a little flour. That's the personal thing about cooking. If everybody does things just a little bit different, the important thing is find the way you like to do it and do it the way you like to do it. Now remember what I said, with yeast doughs, you want to work that a lot and it'll make it fluffy at the end. With biscuits and pie dough, you want to work it as little as possible because it'll make it tough. So we're just going to pat this down to about the height that we want our biscuit to be. So let's think this through. I know I've got plenty of flour underneath. I'm just going to turn it and check to make sure it's not sticking anywhere. Boy, that feels really good. There are some different schools of thought you can take with this. Some folks will cut this and stack it a few times to make really flaky biscuits. Can you see all the little chunks of butter in there? Those are going to pop and make for the butteriest biscuits you have ever had. All right, now, just so you'll know, our oven is preheated. And I've already put our cast iron skillet in the oven. And whenever we're ready, we're gonna take it out and we're gonna butter it in just a few minutes. But first, let's cut out our biscuits. Get a little flour. Now this recipe makes 6 large biscuits. You just cut it out, wiggle it around a little bit, and you can move it over to the side. I don't try to make every single biscuit perfectly round. I kind of like the ones that look like they have a little bite out of them. I think it makes it sweet. Now don't worry too much if you have a little dog leg off on one side. I'll show you what to do with those at the very end, because those are going to make your 6th biscuit. For your 6th biscuit, you're going to end up with all these little pieces, and that's just okay. All you do is you just pile them up. Might not make sense in the beginning, but again, just trust the process. And it looks like this time we might actually end up with an extra biscuit. That's lovely. We're going to pat it out just like that, and we're going to just cut it out just like this. Oh, that's good. I think that's going to be my biscuit. If I can make it to the pan fast enough. The reason I like to use a jar lid is because if something gets stuck in there, you can just gently push it out the top and still end up with a perfect biscuit. Okay, now I've already preheated my cast iron skillet. Remember, when you're handling cast iron, it's very heavy, so you want to use something heavy cloth to pick it up. Now, we're just going to use some butter and roll it all around on the outside of our cast iron. See how nicely that's melting? Do you remember what the rule of thumb is with butter? We measure with our heart. We want to get it all up on the sides. That looks perfect. Now we're going to put our biscuits in. We line them up all around the edge, just like this. The pan is very hot, so watch your fingers. And I always put the tallest biscuit in the middle. Just like that. Now we're ready to put these cast iron skillet biscuits in the oven for about 20 minutes at 350. Okay, now that we've made cast iron skillet biscuits, we're gonna move on to my great grandma Meisel's Sunday pot roast. Let's get started. A lot of people are intimidated by a Sunday roast, and I'm gonna tell you why. you may relate to this. People get scared about making a roast because they're afraid it'll be tough and they don't know how to get it both tender and get that crunchy caramelized topping. We're gonna solve both of those problems today in one whack, and I'll show you how. Best thing of all, from start to finish, I would say this whole thing takes about an hour once you have everything prepped and ready. The first thing we wanna do is we wanna have our meat at room temperature. This is really important. I'm not a scientist. I'll just tell you, it needs to be at room temperature because it helps with the tenderizing process. So now listen, sometimes you find a chuck roast on special. Today, we ended up with the round roast. I'm gonna show you what to do if that happens to you and somebody brings the wrong thing from the grocery store. So no hill for a stepper, we've got it figured out. So the first thing we'll do, you might think it would be to saute things. It's not. We're gonna start right away with chopping and cleaning our vegetables. So I've got some mushrooms. Now, if you've got a picky eater in your family, you don't have to use mushrooms. I like mushrooms, and if you chop them up a little, you can sneak them in as long as nobody has an allergy and get a few extra veggies in with your family. So like I said, if you have a picky eater, you can chop these up real little, which I personally like because there isn't a saute process in the beginning of this. So you literally lay these down in butter and lay the roast right on top and just let it sit, take a little butter nap, and that's what makes the caramelization process happen. If you move stuff around in the butter, it's not gonna caramelize. That's a very important thing to remember. So we're gonna do just a few of these mushrooms. I might do another half a mushroom just to be on the safe side. We're gonna chop that up really nicely. I hope y'all are having a good day. If you haven't eaten yet, this is gonna make you hungry. So, and if you don't have the stuff to make this, you might wanna just go ahead and get you a snack and order this on something to make on Sunday or Tuesday or Thursday or Friday. And come on back and watch it again and I'll make it with you, okay? You can slow this down and rewind it and just follow everything step by step. And if you have any questions, you can just write in and email and ask questions and we'll be glad to help you, okay? All right, so we've got this chopped up. We've got our garlic already and it's already been minced up. And then we've got our salt and pepper. And I think we're ready. One more thing we've got to do is yellow onion. Now, some people like a white onion. If I'm going to do something cold, like tacos, I like a white onion. If I'm going to cook it, general rule of thumb is I like to use a yellow sweet onion. So now, I hope this is okay with all of y'all, but I'm going to just move this onion right over here on the side because I don't see how when you cut that, it gets all these little flakes everywhere. I don't want to get that mixed into anything else that I'm doing. So I'm going to make myself a little pile right over here. No problem. Just rip that right off. Now you can see that's starting a spot for you to start to peel that outside off. Just get you a nice little hold on there and start peeling that outside off. You don't want to take off too many layers, but don't be afraid to get down to the slick part. There's plenty of onion to go around. My kids and I always say, ogres are like onions, they have layers. There's plenty of ogre and onion to go around. So you just keep working those layers around. There's an outside crusty part and then a next layer. You want to get both the crusty part and the next membrane-y type layer off of that onion and get down to the moist, slick part, okay? So we're gonna peel all that off. Just keep working it around. I kind of think this is therapeutic. Now what you don't wanna do is you don't wanna touch your eyes while you're doing this, unless you need to be real dramatic about something and prove a point, and then touch your eyes. And you just pretend like you're crying about something real important. Now, after this point, I typically will rinse my knife off because I don't want to have that crusty stuff in the rest of my meal, okay? So I'm going to rinse my knife off real quick. Okay, I'm only going to use, this is a pretty big onion, so I'm only going to use, I'll just eyeball it, but I probably use about a third of that total onion. We're going to see how it looks in the pan. So what I'm doing now is I've cut the onion that way. I'm gonna move part of it over to the side. If this was a smaller onion, I just use half of it. I'm not sure, based on this roast, how much onion I really wanna use. So I'm gonna just probably use about 1/4 of this onion. So I'm gonna slice it down this way, and then see all those layers in there? Once we cut it this way, and then we turn around and cut it this way, it's gonna make all these really nice little small pieces. Sometimes that's a little errant. We'll get rid of that one. It's gonna make all these little small pieces of onion that are going to caramelize on top of your roast. And everybody in your family is gonna be like, when did you become a roast rock star? And you're gonna be like, today. Don't be afraid to chop it up. Now listen, depending on where you start cutting into this thing, you're gonna end up with something that may look like that. It won't hurt anything if you forget and put that in your roast, but I just typically throw it off to the side. If you have chickens, give it to your chickens, your pigs, whatever. If you don't have any of those things, just laugh about the fact that I just said you might have chickens and pigs in your backyard. Okay, so check for any big pieces. You really don't want anybody taking a whole big bite of onion like that, not in this dish, and that won't caramelize super well. So if you got any big pieces, no big deal. Just go back and cut them up small, because what you're wanting, think about this end process. What you're wanting to happen is you're wanting all of these little bitty pieces to basically fry and caramelize in the butter in your skillet on top of that roast and get that good caramelization, okay? So I think this is a really good start. I think we've got all the right ingredients here to start our cooking process. So what we'll do is we're going to put some butter in the bottom of our pan, and we're going to get that started, and then we're going to let that get hot, and we're going to cut into this roast. And this roast, like I said, it is a round roast instead of a chuck roast. And actually, I didn't go to medical school, but we're gonna doctor this thing up. I do not want this fatty piece on here. We're just gonna take that off. No big deal. What you wanna end up with is something about that thick. And you always wanna be, do you see how there's a grain on this? So there's a grain that goes across that way. Think about when you're cutting this thing at the very end, you always want to be cutting a roast against the grain for the most tender outcome. So when you lay this thing in there and you're thinking about cutting down, always you want the grain to be going like the horizon in the sky. Think about that. So you put the grain like the horizon in the sky so that when you're cutting up and down on that thing, you're getting the most tender fall apart piece of roast on your plate and on your fork, okay? Grain like the horizon in the sky. So this is too tall. This is just too tall. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut this into 2 even pieces. It doesn't matter that this one's gonna be tinier than this one. What matters is that they're the same height, okay? And I'll show you why in just a little bit. So what we're gonna do is eyeball this. Now listen, I come from Missouri, and we have what's called the School of Mines. So there's a whole bunch of engineers in my town, and when I do things like this, oh my goodness, they want me to get out the tape measure and the rulers and things, but there's just some good old-fashioned eyeballing and cooking. How did I do? Pretty good? I think that looks pretty good. Now see, see that grain? You can really see it well. Once I took that top piece off. That top piece was just confusing. So the next thing we'll do now that we've got everything ready is we're gonna put some butter in the bottom of this pan. And I normally cook on gas, so I'm gonna move all of this over to the gas stove. Y'all wanna come with me? Let's go. Let's see if we can get this oven lit. How about blowing up the house? That's always how it is, you know, in old houses. Eureka! Let's see how, there we go, there we go. Now when you're cooking with butter, butter will burn very easily. So when you're doing this, one of the reasons why I love cast iron, and a lot of people love cast iron, is first of all, it's very sentimental. We love sentimental things, okay? The second reason is because it has a very even heat distribution. Now this is my old cast iron. I brought it with me. I just love cooking on cast iron. So we're gonna let this heat up just a little bit, and while we do, we're gonna get our butter cut and put in here. And we're gonna leave this heat on a medium temperature. You could go medium high if you're in a hurry, but don't ever cook butter on high if you're doing this, because you're gonna burn it and you're gonna be sad and sorry, okay? So here's our butter, here we go, okay. So now listen, there is no measurement for this butter. I'm a firm believer we do not measure butter when we're cooking with things, we measure butter with our heart. So it just depends on how you're feeling that day. I will typically put, oh goodness, probably 3 pats, big old pats, just like that in the bottom of my skillet. That's gonna start melting very quickly because the skillet is gonna start to get hot. Right on top of that butter, as soon as it starts to coat the bottom of our pan. Now this cast iron skillet's not hot yet, so you can still touch these handles. Once it gets good and hot, you do not want to touch this unless you have something very heavy to hang on to it with. So that butter is all in the bottom of the pan, and now we're going to start adding all the ingredients into this cast iron skillet that is going to be flipped over and end up on top of our caramelized roast, okay? So we're gonna add a handful of onion, and we're gonna add some mushrooms that we're trying to hide from our kids who don't like them. And you're just gonna really add enough to coat the bottom of your pan. And again, you don't really wanna move this around a lot because you want it to caramelize. You are not trying to sear this, okay? So let's put our lid on and let it get good and hot. Now, once this is hot, we can go ahead and put our meat on. We're gonna let this caramelize. It doesn't take too terribly long. And then once it's caramelized, we'll flip it over, add some water. I'll show you how to do that. You don't want to add too much, but you have to have just enough. And then there's just this super simple process where you can just let that cook, make the rest of your meal. Your kitchen's going to smell amazing, and you're going to feel so good that you made this great grandma Sunday dinner right in your home, and nobody's going to understand how you did it because you did it without a crock pot. Okay, let's check on this butter. It's starting to bubble. Now I know a watch pot never boils, but sometimes you can just about get it to. All right, we're gonna stir this around just a little bit, just to get the butter evenly distributed in here. Now remember, we are not stirring this for any other reason other than to just get everything evenly distributed, because what we want is for that to almost think about this as icing on top of your roast. So you want an even layer of icing. Well, this is like a butter, mushroom, and onion icing for the top of your roast. So that's starting to sizzle. You don't want to let it go too long. We're going to lay this topside down into your pan. Now, if you've had to cut your roast like I did, it's just no big deal. It's absolutely no big deal. It's all food. It's all going to eat just fine. You're going to lay the flattest side you have down into the pan. You hear that? That's a good sound. That's the sound you want to hear. So I think I am actually going to turn my heat up just a tiny bit, and I'm just going to let that cook. You have a couple different options here. If you're cooking in a shallow pan, you could put your lid on. If you're worried about splattering, you could put your lid on kind of cockeyed like that to just prevent splattering. What you don't want to do is capture a lot of steam in here, because that, in my opinion, will mess up your caramelization process. It'll make everything too soft and not crispy enough. What you're looking for is for the bottom of everything you've got going on in this pan to get crispy. So you want that butter to start evaporating, drying up, and getting crispy on the bottom of your meat, okay? So we're actually just gonna leave the lid off, let that do its thing, and we're gonna get started on the rest of our meal. Now about this time, everybody in your house is gonna start walking in wanting to know what's for supper and what you got cooking and do you have any of it ready? The answer is something good and not quite yet. Let me show you what's going on. Okay, so do not be dismayed. This roast is not done yet, but the right parts are just right. So if you'll check in the bottom of that, see how that's nice and caramelized? It's just the way we want it. The top is undone. Be not dismayed, young people. Be not dismayed. You can grab a pancake turner. You can grab whatever you have. I got these handy dandy things. They're supposed to be for salads, but I use them like little paws, and they're great for everything. So I just grab my meat. You want to try not to disturb the top of your meat because that's where all the deliciousness has taken place, okay? You could let this go a little longer if you want it to. Today, I want to get onto other parts of my meal and I don't want it to burn. So I'm ready to just flip it and get on with it. My great-grandma's Sunday roast it's very forgiving. And I'll tell you what my mom always tells me. Sometimes at the end, if it ends up a little tough, she'll just say, well, sometimes you just end up with a tough piece of meat. She always blames it on the meat and never herself. And I firmly believe you should take that very same stance. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do something that really wasn't available until 1952 when onion soup mix was developed, right? Now, prior to that, what my great-grandma did was my mom said that my grandma Mizell would just put onions, salt, pepper, and garlic in the bottom of the pan. My great-grandma Mizell made this every single Sunday on a wood stove. Can you believe that? As hot as it was back then down in the South. That's why our family calls this Sunday roast, and we had this every single Sunday of my entire life. Now, my grandma Mizell would make this with rice or mashed potatoes. My preference is rice, but y'all can do what you want. She made it with rice or mashed potatoes, English peas, and my mom said she was a little girl, and so she remembers my grandma Mizell making it with Jell-O that has some kind of fruit in it, like peaches or strawberries. Something colorful, something cold, and something sweet. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the topping that is now available to us as onion soup mix. It's very easy. You just take a whole package of onion soup mix, you shake it over the top, and then I'll show you what's next. It's okay if some of it gets down in the bottom of your pan. We don't mind that at all. It'll all end up in the gravy later if you want to make gravy. We just shake it on top, just like that. You don't have to be too perfect with it. In fact, if you don't have onions and mushrooms in the beginning, and all you have is butter, roast, and onion soup mix, you can make a stellar Sunday roast. I just add the onions and mushrooms as a little extra because I like it. You do not mix this in. You don't do anything else to this onion soup mix. You literally just put it on there, you set it and forget it. I like to get every bit of it out that I possibly can because it's so delicious. You leave it on there dry, and now you can see in the bottom of that pan, that butter is really starting to get brown and caramelized on your mushrooms and onions, just the way we like it. We're gonna start with 3 cups of water, and we're gonna see how we do. Now, one word of caution, if you do need to be careful about anything in your pan, you wanna be careful not to get water on top of your roast because you just spent all this time doing all that beautiful caramelization and you don't wanna mess it up. So when you're pouring, just make sure and pour toward the side of your pan. And if you'll notice, you've got 2 really nice spots to do that. You've got this side and you've got this other side over here. So just aim your spout on the side and gently pour so that you don't splash on the top of your roast. Typically it takes about 3 cups. And what you want to do is you want to get within about that far. Can you see that? Can you see that? You want to get about that far to the top of your roast. Now, the sizzling will stop. You might think, oh no, what have I done? No worries, it's totally fine. We didn't quite use 3 cups this time. That's totally fine. We're gonna just set this over to the side because we might need that later. Once you add the water, I like to add beef bouillon. You can use any brand you like. You can use the cubes, or you can spoon it right out of a jar. If you use the cubes, I use 2. If you spoon it out of a jar, I use a heaping spoon. You just drop it right in, plop, plop. And once your water starts to boil, I put one on each side. Once your water starts to boil, I just take a little spoon or a fork and I wiggle it around on both sides to get it evenly distributed, and it will make your kitchen smell amazing. You can salt and pepper the bottom of your pan, or if you're more salt conscious, you can add just a tad bit of salt on top. Either way is delicious. And we're gonna let the magic happen. This is gonna bubble and steam and juice, and all of that soup mix plus the butter and caramelization that we've already put on the top of our roast is gonna come together in the most amazing Sunday roast I hope you've ever had, but will continue to have for the rest of your life. Now that Great Grandma's Sunday roast is in the oven, we're gonna move on to Aunt Imogene's cast iron skillet lattice top caramel apple pie with toasted pecans. Now, if you're like me and you're busy, which we're all busy these days, sometimes you might make a pie crust, sometimes you might not, and that's just all okay. Today, I'm gonna use these refrigerated pie crusts, and we're gonna feel great about it, because in the end, there isn't a single person in our household who's gonna care, and if they do care, next time they can be the pie crust maker, okay? So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna roll out our pie crust. When you buy a pie crust in the store, they didn't know that you were gonna make Aunt Imogene's cast iron skillet pie, and you're gonna need a little bit bigger crust. No problem. I'm gonna show you exactly what to do. And you even get to throw flour on the counter like the professionals. You just take a little flour, you throw it on the counter. See how you look such a professional like doing that? And you're gonna get your rolling pin out. Let's make ourselves a little room here. You're gonna get your rolling pin out. Now listen, when you do a pie crust, it is very easy to rip a pie crust if you don't have a little bit of flour on everything. So we're gonna flour our roller, and we're gonna make ourselves some room so that I don't make a mess. And we're gonna stretch this thing out just a little bit. Now you might think, oh no, what's that gonna do to the end taste? And I will say to you, oh, don't worry, no one's going to care that this pie crust is a millimeter thinner than it was when you bought it, because first of all, it's in a cast iron skillet. Everyone's fascinated with cast iron skillets. Second of all, you're gonna make a caramel sauce and you're gonna put apples and cinnamon in it, and you're gonna put an egg wash on top, and it's gonna look like you bought this at the best place that sells pies in town, but you didn't. It came out of your oven. Okay, see how much bigger we made that? And it's still a great size to mold into all kinds of different shapes, which I will show you how to do. Now, if you've got a cast iron skillet that's been treated, which this one has, it should be non-stick. So you don't have to spray any kind of non-stick cooking spray on this cast iron skillet. Can if you want to, you don't have to, okay? All right, now we're gonna lay this cast iron skillet down. Y'all, I just have to move everything all the time. Isn't that how the way it always goes? We're gonna lay our cast iron skillet down, and I'll show you how to handle a pie crust just the way my mama showed me, and probably her mama showed her, okay? So that we don't rip it. Some people roll it around their rolling pin. I don't know how to do that. I use my arm because we're from the country and we like it that way. I just use my arm just like that, no problem. Move my pie pan over, and then I just lay it in. Like I said, I see fancy people using a rolling pin, and I think that's so nice. I just don't do that. I just use my arm, and my arm is clean because I take a bath pretty much every day. Now, if I had made this pie crust from scratch, I would have left that much room on the end of this pie crust to do some fancy things with it. Be not dismayed. We are going to do fancy things even though it's not that big. It's totally fine. We're going to bend it over the side, and now we're going to get started on our caramel sauce. The secret sauce, if you will, could be considered to be the caramel. My personal favorite is the toasted pecans. My grandparents actually had, in the South, a pecan farm. I didn't know it. I just thought there were a bunch of trees in their front yard. But every once in a while, they'd hand us all sacks and tell us to go pick up pecans. And then we'd sit around on the porch when it cooled off at night, and we'd shuck pecans. In fact, after pecan season was over, we had what we called pecan shelling parties. I don't know why, but they always involved carom. Carom is a game that's kind of like pool for thumping, and our fingers were always so sore. We'd spread out newspaper all over the kitchen tables, and all the grown-ups would sit around and shell pecans and eat and talk and laugh. You know, it was one of my favorite times growing up. So we just want enough to sprinkle. But before we sprinkle, we're going to toast these pecans in the oven. I like to toast pecans about 400 degrees, and I start at 5 minutes, and I just see when they start to smell done. There's a very fine line between done and burnt, so keep an eye on them and don't leave the room. So preheat your oven to 400 degrees. We're going to sprinkle these pecans on a clean pan that has not been sprayed with anything. We're not trying to fry them. I know y'all know I like to fry everything with butter. I'm not frying these pecans today. We're just going to get enough to toast them, dry them out a little bit. Pecans are very moist by nature. We're just going to get enough to sprinkle on top of our pie. If you're ever having a hard day, I'm going to show you how to fix it with butter. Now, traditional school of thought would be you want to cube up your butter before you put it in something because it heats up a lot faster. But I'm going to tell you, there's just something so satisfying about plopping a big old lump of butter in a pan, and we're just going to do it together. Okay, you've got your cast iron skillet hot on the stove. Let's make this delicious caramel sauce to go in our pie. You just take your butter, put it on a cute plate if you want to. Feel fancy, I don't care, I'm right here with you. And just plop it right in that pan. Doesn't that feel good? You can just cut it up in there if you want to, but believe me, it'll melt. As hot as it's been outside, it'll melt whether you want it to or not. You can cut it up right in the pan. I don't know why I love it so much. I just love plopping a whole stick of butter in something. Oh, I gotta tell you this. My sister makes the best corn known to man. Now, we're not making corn today, we'll make that another day. But I said to her, I was like, how do you make your corn so good? I use a stick of butter. I said, for how much corn? She said, for any amount of corn. You just start with a stick of butter and put however much corn you want in the pan. I subscribe to that. Okay, so now our butter's melting nicely. We're gonna get it all melted up nicely in the bottom of the pan. And while that's getting ready, we're gonna measure out an entire cup of brown sugar. Now, if y'all don't already know, when you measure white sugar, it does not stick together. Brown sugar is simply white sugar and molasses combined. That's why it gets sticky. So we're gonna measure a whole cup of brown sugar. It's kind of like that kinetic sand that your kids play with. You didn't know you were going to have a little therapy session today, did you? We're just going to pack that in. Don't worry about getting it on your countertop. It'll come right off. If you have kids and they're hungry because they're smelling your roast, they'll probably come in here and get it off for you. Now, in 1918, you might not know this, but in 1918, Fanny Farmer developed the Boston School of Cooking cookbook. And she was really a fan of measuring everything level. She would probably fire me because I measure things I like with heaping measurements. So that's not quite level. It's a little heaping, but I really like brown sugar, so we're just gonna roll with it. This is just about melted all the way. I will tell you, do not be careless whenever you put anything into hot liquid on your stove. It could splash back and burn you. So we are gonna be careful whenever we put this in. In fact, you can use your knife that you use to just cut up your butter and put your brown sugar in just a little bit at a time. Because it can splash back on you, and I'll tell you what, burning grease is really hurts. So I don't want you to get hurt, and I want you to have a great experience. So we're just gonna get all your brown sugar into that butter. And in just a few minutes, you're gonna have homemade caramel. Someone's grandmother and someone who come over on a covered wagon somewhere is gonna really get on to me for using metal in this cast iron, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I wanna use a whisk. If you have a silicone whisk at home, you can use a silicone whisk, and then the pioneers and settlers from the wagons won't come to haunt you. Hopefully they won't come haunt me either, but I'm gonna use a whisk because I like this whisk and I like the way it feels in my hand. And to me, cooking makes me happy. There's just nothing quite like the feeling of going in the kitchen, having it all clean, it being kind of quiet, or maybe some music playing, and just getting started on something that you know you're gonna like feeling and you know is gonna be really good for your family. Just making it all happen, like out of your imagination. You just cook something that tastes really good. So I've got this cast iron skillet on medium heat, and we're just gonna work this around. And what you want to see is right now you can see, you'll get in really close on that, you can still see the grains of the sugar, and you can also see the separated butter. And what we want to end up with is all of that being together. Think about how caramel looks whenever you see it, whenever you eat it. That's what you want to end up with, okay? And we may end up at some point using a spatula, and that's okay. But for right now, I'm just going to keep defying gravity and using this whisk. It's really starting to smell good in here. We've got the roast on the stove. We've got the caramel on the stove. It's amazing. This is going to be a really good Sunday dinner. Now again, when you do this, work around the edges, work both ways, as you can see that I'm doing, because you want the sugar granules to dissolve on this medium heat slowly so that it doesn't burn, and you want the butter to incorporate with the sugar so that it all ends up being one smooth mixture. My Aunt Imogene's cast iron skillet caramel apple pie is to die for. But don't die yet, because we're gonna eat some. You use 2 pounds of each apple type. I firmly recommend you use Granny Smith for 2 of those pounds, and a pink and white or pink and yellow type apple for the other 2 pounds. You can use Pink Lady if you like, or Gala, whatever's most in season. I've already got those sliced up and cored and peeled right here. While you're working on your apples, you may notice, after you do this a few times, because believe me, you're now going to be the apple pie maker in your family and your whole community. You may notice after you do this a few times that, especially if you got to go put on a little laundry or you get distracted, your apples may start to turn a little bit brown. Now listen, that's okay. Nothing bad's gonna happen if your apples turn brown. This is just us in our home kitchen. It's just me and you. I always just say to my friends, it's just us chickens. So, but if you don't want them to turn brown, it's okay. What you can do is put a little bit of lemon juice on there. You can squeeze a lemon if you'd like. Just get a half a lemon out and squeeze it on there. Stir it up a little bit. You can use squeezable lemon juice right from your fridge or lemon water. It really doesn't make a big difference. Lemon juice is the trick. You won't taste it in the end. In fact, a little bit of acid, a little bit of lemon juice kind of can make your fruit pop, okay? They got a little brown. It's all fine. Look, it's gonna go in the oven. It's all gonna get brown. We just are gonna be fine with that. Now what we're gonna do next is we're going to toss these apples in a sugar cinnamon mixture. Just about lost an egg there. You can do this a couple of different ways. I personally like to mix my cinnamon in with my sugar so that it's evenly distributed before I put it on the apple. Otherwise, you might just have one little apple slice that has all your cinnamon on it, and that just wouldn't be good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, measure flat. Sometimes I measured a little heaping, but you don't want to do too heaping because it will make you cough a little bit. You might put a little extra in there. There we go. And now we're just going to measure that around. And you can really use anything you'd like. You don't have to be fancy with this. Just going to measure. I'm just going to mix that around until it's evenly combined and you don't see any brown streaks. You want it to all be the same color. You can use a spoon if you want to. I like to use a knife for this because it doesn't displace as much sugar and you don't have to get another bowl dirty. I just use my sugar container. Go all the way to the bottom and all the way around the sides. Now I think that looks just fine. See how that's evenly brown all the way across? Next, we get to do the fun part. We get to add the sugar to our apples. At this point in time, your kids are going to want to start coming in here and eating your apples. Listen, I'm a firm believer that memories are made in the kitchen. So if your kids want to come in and eat some of these apples, just let them. One more apple out of this pie is not going to make that big of a difference. So let them take a couple of apple slices. In fact, if you've got a bunch of kids like I do, I'm a foster and adoptive parent over in the Midwest, over on our farm, just cut an extra apple and plan ahead. Let's sprinkle the cinnamon sugar in. We're going to distribute it evenly all across the top. You know, the things I use in my kitchen mean a lot to me. I've picked up old bowls and old spoons and aprons and old rolling pins from a lot of places. A lot of things I have, I got right from my mama whenever I moved away from home when I was 18 and went to college. I still have her old egg beater, you know, the kind you hold at the top and you roll around like that. I have her old aprons. I have her old mixer that I have worked on, and I actually had to take a hammer to a couple weeks ago. It still works. I made icing with it. Works just fine. You don't have to be perfect with this. What you're looking for is for the cinnamon sugar to be evenly coating all your apple slices. And I think we got it just about right, don't you? There we go. Now we're going to put this in our pan, in our cast iron skillet with our caramel applesauce and our toasted pecans, and make our lattice top. If your kitchen has not brought everybody else in your house in at this point, I just don't even know what to tell you. Let's get the caramel apple and the apples and everything in this pie and get this show rolling. Your cast iron skillet at this point should be cool enough for you to touch. So we're gonna just take a little bit of your caramel applesauce and we're gonna put it, not applesauce, caramel apple sauce. And we're gonna put it in the bottom of your pie. Now, some people like to do this under your pie crust. You can do that if you want to. I like to just put it in the very bottom of the crust because it caramelizes with the heat in the bottom of your oven and gives you a little extra layer of delicious in every bite. So you don't have to be perfect with this. We're gonna distribute this as evenly as you can. If it's hotter, it distributes a little better, but that's okay. We're busy, we have things. The whole point of us getting together like this is to learn how to do these old recipes that our grandmas and our great-great-grandmas did that maybe we haven't done for a while because we are so busy. But we can find a way to do them ourselves today in the year of our Lord, spaceship years, 2000 and something, and make it work for us and our family, and that's just fine. So we get our caramel sauce in the bottom of our pie crust. Now we're going to add our apples. There's no science to this. There's a lot of juice in there. It's really yummy. You are going to have people in your life who are going to want to lick this bowl. There's nothing in here that needs cooked. Just let them lick it. It'll make them very happy. This is like licking the beaters of apple pie right here. You'll notice in the bottom of your pie crust, there's a lot of juice. That's good. You want that. Now, after you make this a few times, you'll decide whether or not at this point you want to sprinkle a little bit of cornstarch on top of your pie to make your filling a little bit thicker. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's totally up to you. We're going to add the rest of our caramel on top of these apples. This doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to melt in the oven because that's what caramel does. Spread it out. What you want, think about when you're cooking or baking, think about when a person gets a slice of your end result. Think about every single bite that person takes and what their experience is going to be. So, do we want a whole blob of caramel right in the middle? I don't think so. I think we want to spread it out a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do. And really, you just can't go wrong. You have apples, cinnamon, and 2 kinds of sugar in a pie. And it's just going to be gorgeous. We're on to what may be your most intimidating part, but it's not going to be after today, and that is making the lattice top. Now, lattice top is simply folding in half over and over and over and over again. If you can fold a piece of paper, you can make a lattice top. We're going to do this together. Now, if you'll remember in the very beginning, I told you that you have to make this pie crust just a little bit bigger, and we're going to do that once more. Remember, anytime you're working with dough, you want to have a little bit of flour or oil between the dough and whatever it is you're touching the dough with. In this case, we're going to use flour. Now, this top pie crust doesn't have to be quite as big as your bottom pie crust because it doesn't have to span quite the distance. Now for the fun part. We're going to cut this into strips. There are different tools you can use for this. Some of them will make a crinkly little edge. Today, we're just going to use our knife that we used to cut the apples, and that's just fine. We're going to make slices today about as big as my finger. Some people like to make big lattice. I like to make small lattice. You can do it however you want. The process is exactly the same. We start at one end, and we just start making slices. We're just going to keep those traditions going so that you can make meals that taste good and feel good together. I just about ran off my cutting board there. That's okay. All right, so now we have those strips, and this is the part where I really want you to pay attention. And if you need to rewatch this over and over again, that's okay. You can do that. Making lattice is like telling a real good story that's so exciting you can't tell where to start. My sister always say, start in the middle and work both ways. We're going to start in the middle and work both ways. So you take your longest piece first and you put it right in the middle of your pie. So this to me looks like my longest piece. And I'm going to start right there and lay it across the middle. And then I'm going to skip one. And you'll see why in just a minute. I like to work. We're going to start in the middle, and I like to work right first, and then I go left. You can do it differently if you want to. It doesn't matter. If you don't know how to do lattice though, I would recommend that you do it this way first until you get the hang of it. So as you'll notice, we just skip a piece. Okay? And now imagine this is our pie. So I'm going to lay it like this. Might be a little easier for you to see. Now we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to transfer every other piece over on our left side. See, I know you were worried about this, and you might still be a little bit worried, but I need you to just trust the process. It's going to be fine. Now is where the folding in half of the piece of paper comes in. Once again, making a lattice is like telling a good story. Start in the middle, work both ways. Start in the middle. We're going to go to our longest piece and just use your finger. Our great-grandmas didn't have anything fancy. They had our fingers. Use your finger, fold it in half. What you do not want to do when you're handling this, because you're going to have to bend this a lot, you don't want to make a crease in your dough because it will break it, okay? So just use your finger, make a nice rounded little spot, and leave it right there. And you're going to do that on every other piece. Just like that. Start in the middle and lay it across. And now we just fold these pieces over. This is like a really good movie where you think, I think I know who did it. I think I know what's about to happen. Can you start to see how this is going to take shape? just going to keep doing this over and over and over again. So you're always going to be taking pieces that are under and folding them back over. Just like that. And remember, leave yourself some room to be gentle and don't crease your pie dough, okay? We've got one more strip left on this side and we're going to lay it right there. That finishes that side. And now we're going to go over to the other side. If you get lost, just remember, take a piece that's under and flip it over. So we're going to take this piece is under, it goes over. This piece is under, it goes over the top. Oop, I almost did that one. It's this one. If you lay your pie out like I did in the same direction as your slices, you'll do great because it'll help you keep track of where you are. Now sometimes when I make this, I put them real close together to where you can't hardly see any pie underneath. Sometimes I put them real far apart. Just kind of depends on how it goes. The reason why some people like to vent, this is called venting a pie. The reason why some people like to vent a pie is because it allows for evaporation in the pie and for the fruit juice to thicken as it cooks. Because it cooks out and it vents out the top. If you'll notice, all fruit pies are vented. Look at that. Look what you just did. Isn't that amazing? Now I'm going to show you my mama's method for making a pretty crust. Like I said, if I had made this crust from scratch, we would have ended up with about that much all along the edge. No worries. We're going to just turn this under and we're just going to make the best of it because it's going to be great. It's going to be delicious. And what we do is we just take what we have and we turn it under to make a finished edge. Believe me, once you get egg wash on this and it comes out of the oven, nobody's gonna care what the edge looks like. I can promise you that. I'm gonna roll it under. They're gonna say, "Did you take a fancy cooking class?" And you're gonna say, "Yes, I did. I saw this on TV and now I know how to make Sunday dinner." Now, getting this to come out golden brown, just like you see in the magazines, is very easy. If you're making a meat or a savory type pie, you use the yellow part of the egg. If you're making a sweet pie, you use the clear part of the egg. I'm going to show you how to do it. I used to watch Little House on the Prairie. And y'all remember, oh, I just lost my train of thought. There we go. We're gonna just get that yellow part right out of there. There we go. So I don't have anything to do with this today, so we're just gonna toss this. I always kind of feel bad about that, but here we are. You wanna whip it till it's nice and foamy and white on top. All right, that looks just about right. If you're doing a meat pie, you wanna use the yellow part of the egg. If you're doing a sweet or a fruit pie, you want to use the white part of the egg or the clear part of the egg called the egg white. We're going to gently brush egg white all over this pie. And then we're going to sprinkle some sugar. Make sure and get it evenly distributed all over the crust, on the edges, and on the top. Now you might say to yourself, egg on a pie. If you don't have a good pastry brush, there's different kinds you can get. You don't have to be necessarily picky. I just like to find one that feels nice in my hand and that makes me happy. That's really how I feel about everything in my kitchen. I like to find things that feel nice in my hand and that make me happy. That looks good. We're gonna sprinkle a little sugar on top and put this in a 350 oven for about an hour. I'm gonna check it at 45 minutes just to be sure. I can't wait to try this pie. Let's put it in the oven and check on the rest of our supper. I've had so much fun with y'all today in Return to Home with Michele. Today we've made cast iron skillet biscuits. We've made my great grandma Meisel's Sunday Dutch oven roast and my Aunt Imogene's cast iron skillet lattice top caramel apple pie. Now I know that's a mouthful, but you're really going to enjoy knowing how to make this Sunday dinner year after year for your family. Just to top it off, I'd like to let you know a couple of things. On this pie, you can put a little butter pecan ice cream right on top just like so. Doesn't that look delicious? And I like to add a little extra caramel right on top, just like that. You talk about a showstopper. I told you in the beginning that you would be asked to make this by everybody you knew, and I wasn't joking. Now, we toasted some pecans, and here's where they come into play. You just drizzle them right on top. Sprinkle, sprinkle. As much or as little as you'd like. It just brings all that nutty goodness and all the flavors together. We've got some jam for our butter biscuits. We've got a beautiful Sunday roast, and I hope you'll join us next time. If you want more information about these recipes, join us at ozarkfarms.org. You can join our mailing list, and make sure and tune in next time for all of our apple, pumpkin, and fall favorites right here. See you soon.